Can we talk a little bit about your arts and your activism and how they come together in your ARThouse project? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in your community in Pittsburgh and what kind of impact that's having.
I bought two houses right next to each other. One of them is the house I live in with my studio, and the other one is a house that is open to whomever chooses to walk into the house when the door is open. When the door is open, anybody can come in. There is art supplies all over the house. There's a reading room, and there's a stage we built in the backyard and a set of bleachers for audience, and there's a large garden right beyond the stage and the bleachers. And because I had to come to the place where I released from my mind all of these ideas that I had been sort of taking in since I was a child about what a successful person is and what a successful person does and how a successful person spends the money of their success and how a successful person got successful. And a lot of it was about college and loans and cars and mortgages and houses and material things. And that didn't work for me for who I was. And I knew that it didn't work because it felt horrible. And it felt so bad that there were times that I just didn't want to be alive in a system like that. And so I did this experiment, my life, where I said, I want to see for 6 months if I can keep myself alive by doing what feels right. Because nothing around me ever said, Vanessa, you can do what feels right and have a life that is sustained. And so for a while, I didn't have running water. I was really seriously depressed, and I was really thinking about not being alive anymore. But what I would do is for 6 months just to see if I could live out of the engine of my own heart and my own ideas. And so every day I would go down to the basement and I would make stuff. I would stack wood and I would take these old broken dolls and I would put them back together. And eventually I put those in a little local art show, and a curator from the Met juried that art show, and they gave me a couple of awards, which meant that I had a 2-person show at an art gallery and that people saw the work. That work got bought by a dealer in New York. That dealer paid thousands and thousands of dollars for stuff that I made from materials that I basically scavenged because I didn't have a lot of money. But what I found for that 6 months of going down to my basement in Homewood, which is a neighborhood that is predominantly African American, which means it's a neighborhood that has really suffered from systemic racism, and suffered from white supremacy, which more people are reckoning with now, what that does to people and their lives and their families. And it really happened. So I live in this neighborhood, and every day for 6 months, I'm going down to the studio with materials I scavenged from vacant lots. And something happened to me in that time, and I found a center of peace. I found a way to communicate my ideas and to express myself, whether it was deep sorrow, grief, or joy, through the process of creating art. And kids would watch me. A little girl would watch me through a window that was like 4 inches by 12 inches. And she would watch me for hours, which made me think, wow, she's experiencing something so powerful, watching me crouch down on the ground through a 4-inch window for hours. I wonder what's happening with her. But I wonder if it's like what's happening to me, how it just feels good. And so I eventually started to share my art supplies with the kids outside my front door. And then they started to knock on my door and they started to be like, are we having art today? And I was like, oh, they gave it a name. We're having art on my porch. So what I found was that same sense of peace and that same transformative clarity that comes through the process of making art, it happened to all the kids who would join me on the front porch. I would share art supplies, and it would be like 15 kids and me, and it would be quiet because everybody would be just so industrious. They would just be working and working and working. And it was so peaceful. And I was like, wow, they're experiencing this, like, for whatever it is for themselves, they're experiencing what I call love. Like, I call it, because I define love as creative, understanding, redemptive, transformative goodwill. And it's happening to them. And I said, what would it be like if I just shared what I love more. And so I bought a house. So that's the idea behind the art house, is you share what you love. And it's harder now because I'm on the road a lot. And so what we did this year was um, I turned the apartment above the art house into a residency. So we'll have an artist in residence. She's actually moving in the next couple of weeks. And it's a residency that's centered on healing. It's centered on art and it's centered on healing. And so we have this huge garden in the back that our neighbors like engage with, and it's a beautiful space. It's a space of sanctuary, a space of transformation. And inside the house, there's lots of art supplies, and we do festivals. Like we did a fall festival, and I brought in like a petting zoo and all of these things that you, like a whole pumpkin patch, things that you wouldn't normally see in the hood. And so the art house gives me an opportunity to really live without my own agency, at the scale of my own two hands. It gives me an opportunity to experiment with love and freedom and creativity in a way that I don't have to ask anybody else's permission for. I don't have to tell my ideas to somebody who's sitting on a panel and they say, well, we don't really like this idea, or we don't like that. I get to learn actively at the scale of one house in one neighborhood with my two hands, sharing creative space and creative experiences with people who can just walk to the space. Like there's not a lot of spaces in my neighborhood that you can just walk to, and you can do that. And so it is a living process. It's something that is alive. And I tell people, people like, oh, can we do this at the art house? I said, well, you can do whatever fits at the art house. Like it's not so rigid, because we're not an institution and we're not actually an organization. It's just a house and people who care about the house and the materials in the house. So things are really happening. I call it the scale of your two hands, or sidewalk scale, where it's not outside of you to have the capacity to activate your ideas at this scale and to share. So that's it.
That's it. As if that's that's a huge thing. That's an incredible thing to do for your community, and it's clearly so valued.
It's like what I understand for myself, and isn't in and of myself, is that like what I do is not an act of selfless generosity. What I do is an act of deep selfishness, because I am only doing what I love the most. I don't actually step outside of that space. And so it doesn't mean that it's always comfortable. It is definitely challenging. But I want to say, because there's like, especially for Black women, especially for Black girls, like we're expected to just give our ideas, give songs, give poems, just like give out. So what I'm doing is really always in constant filling up the well of like my heart and love and creativity. I'm not just externally like, oh, I'm going to do this for my community or for your community, because that doesn't include me in my community. So what I'm doing is sharing first what I love. That's what's happening. And anybody can share what they love. If you love hot dogs, you can have one day a month where you sit out and you grill hot dogs and you just talk to your neighbors and you give away hot dogs. You're like, it's Hot Dog Friday. This is what we're going to do. Because by setting the intention and deliberately saying that you're sharing because you love, things happen and people are open for conversations. And there's a movement of community through spaces that are centered on love and creativity, that are unburdened a lot of times. They don't have the obstacles that a lot of institutions have. So see what it's like to share what you love. Do you love watercolors? Set out some watercolors on a card table in front of your house and let passerbys like do a little watercolor. See what happens. See what kind of conversations you have. If you love pancakes, put a hot plate on your front porch, and Sunday from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, make pancakes and just see what happens when you talk to people. Share. See what happens if you actually use the things that you believe in to do the things that you believe most need to be done.
Now, before we go, do you have any final words of wisdom that you want to share with any young artists who are interested in pursuing a similar path, or just anyone interested in exploring the arts?
Oh, first I would say, listen to yourself. If you have the feeling inside of you validate that feeling yourself, because we live in a world that is oftentimes frightened to validate the feeling and the sense of wanting to live a creative life, right? And so before one seeks a lot of external validation, pay attention to how you feel. Pay attention to that inclination to create, that inclination to invest in expressing your thoughts, your ideas, your humanity. Pay attention to what happens to you, how you feel when you're creating, right? And then pay attention to how you feel when you're working your 9 to 5 job or you're working your summer job. And really, what I say is, like, like if you're on social media a lot, social media, any social media site you're on is keeping massive amounts of data on you. You need to keep massive amounts of data on yourself. So pay attention to those creative ideas. And that's, I would say, the first step is to, before you say, oh, you can't, or you're not as good as this, or you start comparing yourself, pay attention to yourself. Pay attention to your ideas. Pay attention to where you have joy. Pay attention to where you have fear. And then what I would say is, at whatever scale you can, do something as often as possible, right? So whether it's drawing, painting, dancing, invest in yourself. Invest in the time to get whatever materials that you can afford, whatever you can get, and do that work, that creative work, a little bit every day. Invest in yourself. Keep that data on yourself. How does it feel? What time of the day are you creating best? And then what I would also say is important, and I think for young people it's really important because your brain is still developing and is really a great listener to things outside of you. What I would say is, be careful who you share your ideas with, because a lot of times people will try to talk you out of things. So protect your ideas and protect that space of creativity. And to do that protection, what I would say is trust your instincts. If it doesn't feel right to tell your best friend who's like really into something else what you want to do because it just doesn't feel right, it's okay to protect that for a little while. But what I would say is, start on your own, taking in as many ingredients that fuel your inspiration as possible. If you can't buy art books, go to the library, go to Barnes and Noble, and just start flipping through all the books of female photographers. If that's what you're into, do whatever you can to feed that place of inspiration. One, because you can't always count on something outside of you to do that. You can't always count on that, but you can count on following that spark and following that flame of inspiration. Look at images and pay very close attention to what excites you inside of that, so that you can keep following that excitement to the next thing, because you're going to have to fuel and feed that spark so that it becomes like the whole flame of your creativity. And that's what I would say. It's all a lot of internal things of paying attention to yourself, giving yourself the time to create, and investing more in the energy, and like looking at things and talking to people about things that excite you, and trusting that. And sometimes when you don't trust it, if you're having moments of anxiety or insecurity, just repeat to yourself. It's something I have the kids at the ARThouse do. I say you trust yourself, and they'll say, I trust myself. And then another kid will be like, you didn't sound like you believe that. And they all start to say it together. They all start to say, I trust myself. I trust myself. I trust myself. And so that's a gift that you give yourself, is trusting that which is inspiring you creatively, that which is giving you excitement and energy, and even that sort of way that's challenging your creative vision. You trusting that is going to create the space for more of it, right? Because when you doubt it, you sort of tamp it down. So trust it forward. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. I would love to be able to sit down and talk to you in person all day long about everything. I could go all day with this, but thank you again. And I hope you'll be able to come back to the Everson sometime in the future. I would love to meet you in person.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I love the Everson, and I had a really good time spending time with everyone on the staff there and spending time in Syracuse. So thank you.